Go ahead.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Good. Well, if you're joining us here at Red Grace Media, we just want to give you an update on the Shepherds Conference. We've been having a really great time and a lot of good stuff going on, a lot of activity, a lot of fellowship. Just a great time, and already talked with a couple brothers here at the conference. I've talked with Justin Peters and Phil Johnson and a couple other brothers. So we're having a great time. I just wanted to talk about the opening session that John MacArthur just did, which was really good on the clarity of Scripture, and so much to like about the message that MacArthur did. Let me start there. You always need to talk about issues on the clarity of Scripture because we're always being attacked. Scripture is always under attack. Theology is always under attack, and we're always having to deal with heresy and false teaching and different issues, liberalism and whatnot. And so a lot of what MacArthur talked about was spot on. I especially liked when he began talking about the idea of different liberal tenets, postmodern tenets, emergent tenets that, try to get you to doubt Scripture and elevate doubt and prize doubt and value doubt and look down on dogma and look down on certainty and look down on clarity. And so the perspicuity of Scripture is one of those doctrines that needs to be preached on. So this was really good. I would say overall the message was fantastic. The only issue that I would take as a covenant theologian, maybe lowercase t, but as a covenant theologian, as somebody that adheres to a redemptive historical approach to Scripture, when MacArthur was talking about covenant theology having sort of in its hermeneutic a point where the Old Testament is unintelligible without the New Testament, and that only the New Testament can interpret the Old Testament. I would just kindly critique that position, because covenant theologians are not saying at all that the Old Testament is not clear. We believe in something known as the per se reading of Scripture. The per se reading of Scripture means that what you get in terms of New Testament interpretation is actually precisely what the Old Testament is teaching. So not at all are we saying that the New Testament sort of reinterprets the Old Testament. Not at all. What we're saying is that the New Testament, all that the New Testament does is it brings to bear in a fuller fashion the per se reading of Scripture, meaning the original intent, what the authors actually intended. It's actually liberalism that teaches that the apostolic interpretation of the Old Testament is something like a reimagining, a reinventing, sort of a recasting of the original meaning in order to sort of accommodate their apostolic interpretation of the events surrounding the life of Jesus. That is not at all what covenant theology teaches. What covenant theology is simply saying, and what redemptive historical hermeneutics teaches us, is that what the apostles make clear is that there is a unfolding of the gospel from Old to New Testaments. And what you have in the Bible is an intertestamental gospel, an intertestamental gospel. And that's taught in places like Romans chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 through 4, and in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. So if you can remember 1 through 4, 1 through 4, 1 through 4, in all of those sections, what you find is you find that the apostles saw that the one gospel is preached consistently throughout both testaments. And so it is not as if the Old Testament is focused upon the realities of Israel and that the New Testament is focused on the realities of the church. That's where we would part ways theologically and hermeneutically. What we would say is that no, what the New Testament makes clear is that all along, whether Old or New Testament, the one gospel is applied to and is talking about the one people of God, which is the elect. And so, ironically, if you're going to be talking about Calvinism and the Reformation, which MacArthur did in the message, he spoke about the hermeneutics of the reformers. He talked about the dangers of allegorical preaching and allegorical hermeneutics, which I obviously subscribe to. But he also talked about how that some of what covenant theology does, of course, replacement. He called it replacement theology, which I don't personally agree with using that language. I don't think it's accurate. But in talking about replacement theology and covenant theology, again, it as often does. I mean, it's not a surprise to anybody that knows the controversy, but it's always going to boil down to your interpretation: Israel and the church, Israel and the church. And so, for a covenant theologian, they're going to come from the perspective that there is one people of God, the elect. Of course, it's kind of like common sense. If there's the elect, that's one group, right? And so they may have, they may be operating under different sort of titles or identities in terms of the historical situation. So you find the elect manifested in the nation of Israel, obviously, when we're talking about the Old Covenant. But in the New Covenant, as the nation of Israel, as an institution, sort of fades out of view, then it definitely becomes more of a New Testament church, the ecclesia of God. But it's one people of God. Really, it's the manifestation of the elect. And so all I would say is that in no way whatsoever is a redemptive, historical, covenant theology hermeneutic, in no way is that teaching that we have some sort of hidden meaning or deeper meaning or mystical meaning or something like that in the Bible. No, absolutely not. It's just calling for a total organic unity within the Testaments and through the covenants. And so I just thought I'd point that out here at Red Grace, because we do so much covenant theology, we do so much biblical theology and redemptive historical theology. And so, but the message was really, really great, and can't wait to see what else is taught here at the conference. But it's just some of those points are points of conflict among Reformed folks, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about that. So stay tuned for the next update.